Take a deep breath. Happy May Day. Let me see all of you. I'm only seeing myself. Let's see here. View the gallery. Welcome, everybody. How many we've got 30 people here so far, and I'm sure more people are going to join us. Let's see. I don't see any kids. I don't know if I need to make an RE room for breakout. Is that the case or not? Well, anyway, thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Franklin County Unitarian-Universalists Sunday congregational event online with Zoom. And it's the first Sunday in May. I'm looking out my window and seeing all the apple tree is just beginning to put out its leaves. Ellen, my wife, went down to the Hadley Garden Center and bought a whole bunch of flowers to fill in the pots. She's presently taking some of the leftover pepper plants to Lori in Shelburne so they can get going on that. So I'm sure a lot of you are having the same kind of wonderful spring, and we're all grateful for it after the year we've had. Now I'm seeing a few kids. I might set up a breakout room. But before that, let me explain the service this morning. My topic this morning is, the title of the sermon is Systemic Prosperity, and the subtitle is Preserving Democracy by Preventing Aristocracy. So it's kind of a financial, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of economic stuff. Did I bring that book in? I didn't. I was given Thomas Piketty's book, Capitalism in the 21st Century, which is this thing, big, thick thing. But I studied economics in college, so I think I understand part of it. I'm not part of the Paris School of Economics, but I can listen to them. Anyway, so that's the topic of the service this morning. But first, let me share my screen so you can see what's going on. Let's see if there's anything going on in the chat. Not really. Okay. Let's read together while you're muted the words you see on your screen. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. And our first hymn is courtesy of the fellowship in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Oh, did I hit share? I bet I didn't hit share audio. Stop share. The most common mistake. I love that last image. Oh, next slide. Next slide. Let's join in the declaration of fellowship that is usually part of the service of the Bernardston Unitarian Society. We unite to affirm that love is the spirit of this church and service its mission. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to give service to humanity. Well, now is the time in our service when we share each other in the community. If you come to this online meeting this morning with a joy so great that it will lift all our hearts to hear it, please feel free to share that briefly. And on the other hand, if you come here with a burden that you could use the help of other people to listen to your concern and perhaps help carry it for you, that is also a time to do that now. So I'm going to switch here to gallery and see if somebody raises their hands. Annette, would you unmute yourself?
I'm going to light a candle for Mo Spalding. She doesn't come on Zoom, but we want to think about her. It was her birthday this week. And in 2 days, it's Mark's birthday. So I'm going to light 2 candles for good years ahead for our 2 members.
Let's see here. Link, could you unmute yourself?
Yes, I can. Tuesday morning, I started into work and walked up the pathway to my office and stopped dead by the fragrance of the newly popped lilacs. And it reminds me every year how great life is and how great change is. And it's something you don't remember. It's new the first time, every time you see it. It just brought a great joy to my heart.
Sandra?
I just want to welcome Robin Panagakos to our gathering this morning. I see her on her phone, and she's down in Texas, but she's a longtime Greenfield resident. So Robin, hi and welcome. I'm so glad you're with us today.
Jennifer Smith?
I wanted to light a candle of thanks and gratitude and joy for Allison and what she brought to our communities over the past 3 months. We're so grateful to have the gift of rest for Melissa and looking forward to the joy of having her back. So thank you to both.
Thank you.
I'd like to share a joy. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it, but all 3 of our churches are ancient buildings that have stood the test of time, but need periodic maintenance and stuff like this. And if you've been to the sanctuary of All Souls Church, on the right side, on the west side of the sanctuary, we used to have a roof leak, and that had peeled the paint away from the walls and things like this. And Jennifer has finished painting that and made it all nice and spanking new. I don't know, Rocky, if you have a picture of that you could share with us. I'll give you some time to look that up, and maybe I'll let you share your screen. We can show that in a minute, okay? Molly.
Yes, 2 things. Greetings to Robin in Texas. And the second thing, I have a joy. I'm going to be traveling by train to Washington, D.C. this week to visit my family for a couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that. And I would tell people that there's socially distanced seating on Amtrak until May 23rd, and the fares are really down. So if anybody's thinking of making a trip, and that's any kind of an incentive, I mentioned that. So thanks and be well.
Thank you. I've got a message here over chat that Rylan wants to light a candle because all of her grandparents have been vaccinated. Yay. And Ellen just passed her 2 weeks, so I say yay on that too. I just want to check and see. Some people check in on YouTube, but they're not on the chat, the Zoom chat. Nothing. If you do have a joy or concern to share on YouTube, put it in the chat and I'll try to have a look at that. Rocky, were you able to dig up that picture? Let's see.
Dan, you're missing Paul Bocco.
Oh, Paul, go ahead. My mistake.
Thanks, Sandra. I don't know you, but thank you. And this isn't my share, but I just wanted to say, Dan, there must be a conspiracy with Unitarian Universalist Church. We have the same leak at First Parish Northfield. So it's been fixed, though, and a couple of my skilled fellow church members are fixing things. So I just wanted to say I want to express some joy for our daughter, Nina. Just on Friday, maybe Thursday, she did her senior exhibition of her learning of her whole high school career. And so it sort of started graduation season. So if everyone can send some warm thoughts for that out, we're very proud of her. So thank you.
I'd like to light a candle of joy because on May 7th, I'll be lighting 29 candles for my daughter, Jazz.
Yeah, Rocky.
I've got it up, but I don't know how to share it.
You should now have a share screen at the bottom. I just made you a co-host, so you can share the screen at the bottom click on the green.
I'm leaving around noon, maybe a teeny bit before.
Oh, okay.
You too. I'm going to try to be back in time for writers group. We can do our usual rhythm in the evening. All right.
Rob,
Hope you have a good walk with Deborah.
Can you see it now?
I'm sorry. I thought he was talking to us.
I was just going to say, we got the Debs covered.
Just a second here.
Can you mute yourself?
Wait a minute. Here we are. Sorry.
I just have a quick joy. Digi went for his first swim in the ocean yesterday. He just kind of was walking along the shoreline, then he walked into the water, then he kept on swimming. I had to kind of go in after him, but it was very cute. He had a fun time swimming in the ocean.
Are there any other joys or concerns? Rocky, has the share screen button appeared for you?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm trying. How's that? Can you see anything yet?
Not yet. You have to, when you click screen sharing, you have to select which, there you go. Wow. That's beautiful. Man, what a change.
Bravo, bravo.
Bravo.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
And
all right, you can stop the, we'll stop the participant sharing. All right. We'll light one more virtual candle. For those, let me spotlight the screen there. We'll light one more virtual candle to mark all those joys and concerns that we carry with us unspoken through the week. Thank you. Okay. All right. And no, I can't unspotlight it. That's odd. There we go. All right. I think it's fair to say that we've come through the pandemic in pretty good shape, all three of the churches. But we're now in sort of a rebuilding mode. I think we are looking towards ramping up for the next year. And for that reason, we do appreciate your continued support. And I think everybody that I see here is a member of of the congregations, and those who are guests, feel free not to drop anything in the plate. But the Bernardston Unitarian Society and also Greenfield and First Parish Hampton, that was an autocorrect, Northfield, would all appreciate you can contact them to help support this work that helps support us. Let's see, what's next? Do we have any announcements? Annette, what's next? What's going for the churches next week?
Right now, Barry is planning on preaching from North Carolina, but there may be a change in the works, but I will send everybody their email, so stay tuned. We will be gathering on Zoom.
Okay. What's happening in Northfield next Sunday? I haven't kept up with the flow of the weekends here.
I can
Bruce?
speak.
No, Melissa is preaching next Sunday.
Okay. There we go. Speaking of which, would you like me to set up a breakout room for the RE group? I'm going to set one up and you can go to it if you wish.
My understanding is that it's every third week,
Okay.
third Sunday.
All right. All right. Well, I do, it's sort of a serious subject. And I chose the next song because the kinds of quiet economic desperation that it embodies, it just does it so well, even though it's not a formal hymn. I thought it would be a nice addition to the service. So here's a little Tracy Chapman. Well, that song perfectly reflects the mood of a couple of films that were nominated for Oscars this past year. And the movie that won the Oscar for Best Picture, Nomadland, is about people who live on the margins of society, living in vans, RVs, and cars. They go from summer jobs at a national park to temp jobs over Christmas season at an Amazon warehouse. And another film that we saw, we were interested in the Oscar nominees, it was Hillbilly Elegy, which is about a young man struggling to break out of his family's poverty. And a crucial scene is when his grandmother gets a Meals on Wheels for one and splits it in half to share with him because there's no other food available. Another movie, Minari, talks about people who have emigrated in search of a better life. A Korean family moves to Arkansas to start a farm, but their American dream of lifting themselves up is undermined by circumstances beyond their control. A well runs dry, a child has a heart condition, there's a canceled order, there's a stroke, a barn fire. And last year's Oscar winner for Best Picture, Parasite, was about sort of a dark comedy of a poor family scheming to get into the service of a rich family's home. And these movies reflect a widespread reality about life on the lower rungs of the economy worldwide. People no longer expect that the future is going to be more prosperous than the past. For many parts of society, things have gotten worse, and if we don't change the rules by which capitalism runs, it's likely that future generations could do even worse. Truly religious people need to speak out about economic injustice, and we need to speak up with intelligence, compassion, and commitment. Because we believe in the value of human beings, in justice, in the guidance of reason, we have a duty to educate ourselves about money. Unitarian Universalists can be thought leaders who attack outdated ideas that hold us back from a better life. No one should have to wait in line for a food handout or spend the night under a tarp by the freeway. Education and medical care shouldn't be commodities that are auctioned off to the highest bidder. This is not a dream. It's a real possibility. There is more than enough to go around. The only scarcities we really face are a scarcity of knowledge, a scarcity of courage, and a scarcity of compassion. Now, just as systemic racism is based on falsehoods, so is systemic poverty. I believe, and many good economists believe, that we can replace systemic poverty with systemic prosperity if we're willing to let go of outdated ideological concepts on both the left and the right and see the world and our fellow human beings in a whole new way. I'm not talking about a class war that sets the poor against the rich. I'm not talking about communism, and I'm not talking about a mythical world where every outcome is equal. I am talking about a democratic system that proportionately rewards talent and skill without letting the benefits of technology and progress accrue mostly to the top 1%. To do so will undermine democracy by letting a new aristocracy arise. If we let 1% of humanity own 80% of the wealth, it won't be good for anybody, rich or poor. You don't want to be the rich person who has to fly your helicopter over massive slums to get to your estate. There's no sense being wealthy in a dystopian future. It's been proven in history that aristocratic societies don't grow their wealth as fast as democratic societies. You don't want to hold on to a big piece of a stagnant pie. Now, let me see here. I'm going to get a little academic for you here. Hope you don't mind. But, you know, this is where it starts. This is a chart that illustrates the changes that American society has faced in inequality in the last century. You know, thanks to income tax records, we have a very accurate picture of who's earned what since 1914. This chart is from the World Inequality Database, WID World, and they have figures like this for every country for which decent data is available. Now, if you're on a small screen, it might be hard to see this, I understand. Over here, first of all, the blue line represents the pre-tax share of income of the 1%, okay? And the red line represents the pre-tax share of national income by the bottom half, the bottom 50%. And on the left side of the graph here, that starts in 1914, actually, and it goes to, I think, 2019, yes. Now, as you can see here, during World War I, the richest 1% were getting about 20% of all income. And the poorest half were getting just above 13% maybe. Now, there was a little dip in dividends and rents earned by the 1% in 1929, but they recovered pretty fast. Now, look what happens during the war years. the lines cross. In 1944, the bottom half starts earning a larger share of national income than the top 1%, and they start getting a smaller share. Now, important note here, this doesn't mean that the rich are getting less income because the economy is growing. They're probably getting more in absolute terms, but the gains between 1944 and 1996, the gains are being spread out more equally across different income groups. So did I click that? There we go. There's World War II. By 1970, the bottom half of income earners, this is income, not wealth, they peak at getting 20% of national income. But don't weep for the wealthy too much, because by 1996, we go, quote unquote, back to normal. The bottom half are now earning about 13%, and the top income bracket is earning 19%. Not quite as good as what they had before the war, but they're doing pretty well. Now, what does this tell us? It tells us that the post-war decades were unusual in history, in the bottom half getting a larger share of income than the top 1%. People my age and most of your ages, as I look out among you, we grew up in a different time when the middle class was doing very well. The other thing is not shown on the chart, but a more equal distribution of income when the rich got less of a share did not destroy capitalism. It also shows on the right half of the graph that the feeling of working people that they're getting the shaft is backed by economic reality, by hard numbers. The game table has been tilted to favor the very top. Now, this graph might give you the wrong impression. Let me put this in dollar terms, if I could. Suppose the top 1% get 20% of national income. And suppose that the national income is paid out at $100 per hour. The top 1% get $20, and the bottom 50% get 20 cents an hour. Now, by the time we get to 1970, the way it was in America, when the 1% get 10% of national income, they would get $10 an hour, and the average worker would get 40 cents an hour of that $100 mythical income. You know, it's still better to be in the 1%. You know, you're making 25 times the 40 cents an hour that the average worker is making. And this is the kind of capitalism where the CEO of the company makes 21 times the salary of an average worker. And today, the average CEO gets 320 times the average. Now, keep in mind that these are the extremes. They focused on the poorest half, which includes students and people working part-time, and the richest of the rich. There is about $90 of national income that is being received by the middle and upper middle classes. Let's call them the 49%. Now, it's fair to say, and plenty of conservatives say this, hey, things can't be this bad. I wouldn't trade the economy of 2021 for the economy of 1970, and you'd be right. Capitalism did make the pie much bigger. Here's a graph of average national income from 1870, and this is in 2019 dollars. Inflation is accounted for as well as you can account for it. The average income rose from about $10,000 a year in today's dollars in 1900, and now it's up there, or, before the pandemic, it's $74,161. So in the last 40 years, compared to in 1975, the average national income was about 40 grand a year. And that means that income has risen 185%. So why are some people complaining? Well, we were more productive. There were computers and all kinds of technological advantage. But that increase in gross national product went mostly to the top earners. In this graph from EPI, the very high wage earners have gained, since this is baseline 1980, very high wage gained 41%, again, equalized for inflation. Middle wage earners went up a little bit. Low wage workers actually went down 5%. Boy, aren't figures fun? Now, at this point in my sermon, you might expect me to be a good liberal preacher and rant about the evils of capitalism and the immorality of the wealthy, that all inequality is the result of the oppression of innocent people by an artificial hierarchy with narcissistic sociopaths at the top. A little bit of that is true. But I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I find that kind of position naive. It's not based on a study of history, and it relies too much on outdated readings of Marxist theory. And those Marxist theories didn't play out well when they tried to apply them in the 20th century. Efforts to make a perfectly flat society conflict with human psychology. If you're looking for a society that has total equality, you could look at China under Chairman Mao in the 50s and 60s. There was very little inequality of wealth and no concentration of wealth, and there was very little wealth. Under China's current system of state-controlled capitalism, inequality has become a problem for them. But also, the average income of Chinese people has risen 800%. That kind of special directed capitalism they're doing has lifted 500 million people out of poverty. Now, there are some real problems to that too. Pollution, exploitation of workers, political oppression. But a lot of Chinese are okay with that trade-off. Another historical example is when Stalin branded successful farmers as capitalist enemies of the state and sent them to the gulag or murdered them. The result was a famine that killed between 6 and 7 million people. There was a hierarchy of oppression that overthrew a hierarchy of competence with disastrous results, especially for people in Ukraine and Kazakhstan, which is one of the reasons that Ukrainians are afraid of Russian domination now. The French economist Thomas Piketty makes a real good case about this, that the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, even the French Revolution in 1789, all occurred in the context of extremely concentrated of wealth. And let's show, you should, if you have a chance, you should listen to some YouTube from this guy. Let me share that. I will say that when you hear a lecture by Dr. Piketty, it might be a little hard to follow, and he's apologetic about this. He says, my English sounds very much like French. But he's a brilliant man, and he is influencing a whole generation of economists. So, but the story of him is that he was interested in that idea of revolutions happening when equality was so bad. And he basically went out and did extensive research over centuries of records of wealth, all the way back to the time of Louis XVI. And the book Capital in the 21st Century all 577 pages of it, he says that the relatively egalitarian world that we lived in between 1914 and 18 was a historical exception to the rule of aristocratic concentration of wealth. And he goes into an interesting analysis of how wealth was destroyed and more shared by the effects of two world wars. For 40 years, the world basically was in a rebuilding mode where we had to pay the workers who hadn't been killed a decent wage to rebuild the cities, the bridges, the factories that had been bombed out. And now that time is over. Worldwide, economies from China to Europe and the United States are in a deregulated international financial system that's structured to ensure that relatively the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the middle class declines in size. Now, an aristocratic system doesn't develop because of intelligence or skill. Neither is it a matter of extraordinary greed. It's a mathematical consequence system. If you own enough capital and you can live on a small proportion of the income from it and reinvest the rest, it compounds theoretically forever. And just as a modest example of this, suppose you had $5 million and you invest that at 5%. Not easy, but possible. That would give you an annual income of $250,000 a year. If you spend, like the median American, you spend 70 grand of that and index it for inflation, at the end of 10 years, you would have even more. In terms of purchasing power, you'd have about $6 million worth of capital behind you. And basically what you have here, for 10 years, you've lived a middle-class life without having to work. This is the world of Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy. In this case, it's the idle middle class, but the idle rich is the same. With this kind of compounding effect, imagine what happens when your father is a billionaire, where runaway wealth gets out of a nuclear reactor with all the control rods pulled out of it, and society melts down when inequality becomes so extreme that it can't be managed. And Piketty says the end result is the guillotine, the gulag, civil disorder, and revolution. Without rules that prevent this runaway effect, things like a progressive income tax, inheritance tax, property tax, we will have a new aristocracy, same as the old aristocracy. In every historical case that Piketty researched, a small segment of the population winds up controlling the land, the factories, the natural resources. When people today rail against capitalism, this is the kind of capitalism they're talking about. Now, I grew up with a different kind of capitalism in the United States. The top income tax when I was growing up, the average was 82%. It's now 37%. The tax on the states used to be 70%. Now there's no estate tax on fortunes worth less than about 12 million bucks, and the rate maxes out at 40%. Corporations used to pay much higher taxes. In the 60s, the top corporate rate was around 50%. Now it's about 21%. And not only are corporate rates much lower, the multinationals can park their profits in tax havens. For example, in 2015, Google made $15 billion in Bermuda. Google's main operations aren't in Bermuda, but I'm sure a few executives flew there for meetings every January. Now, this is all perfectly legal. Billionaires and corporations are multinational. Governments are not. So Piketty suggests that we need to have international agreements so that the ultra wealthy can't go shopping for the island or the nation that taxes them the least. Taxes should be paid in the countries where you actually make your money. And by the way, if you have a Netflix subscription, look for the video Capital in the 21st Century. It's an hour long, a lot easier to read than the book. Now, this is not about demonizing the rich. I think that's a mistake. Jordan Peterson has said that some of his friends in the Canadian Liberal Party don't love the workers, they just hate the rich. And sometimes we fall into that trap. Wealthy people like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs have said that they're willing to pay taxes to keep society from falling apart. Taxes are the price we pay for living in a civilized society. My wife, Ellen, said, when I was talking to her about this, she said that capitalism is like the huge oxen we used to see at the county fairs. When they're yoked and directed by a farmer, they can plow the fields and pull wagons. But if you just set them loose, they're going to trample the corn and knock down the fences, maybe gore a farmhand or two. You don't want to get rid of the power of capitalism. You want to control and direct it to meet human needs. Money is a social construct that we play. We can set the rules so that everyone gets a turn in the game. This does not mean that everyone's going to win a trophy at the end. But losing a game or two is fatal. The COVID epidemic has shaken up the economic order of the entire world. In the United States, it forced us to give stimulus payments to keep the economy from going off a cliff. It forced us to subsidize vaccine development and delivery. It decimated whole sectors of the economy like restaurants, travel, healthcare, education, live entertainment, while other sectors were untouched or even did better, like Amazon, Zoom, and UPS. The good news is that in the current relief bill, American parents are going to receive direct payments to support their kids, about $300 per month per child. And this kind of subsidy for parents to lessen child poverty is something that Canada, Denmark, Britain, all have been done for a long time. Systemic prosperity can happen in our lifetime. Now, I'm a bit of a nerd on this. I realize that charts and graphs and numbers can be confusing. It becomes this dismal science of percentages. Unfortunately, too many of us give up thinking that anything can be done, or we hide out in a little ideological bubble filled with opinions instead of facts. The far right seems to believe that everything will be great if we just get government out of the way and lower taxes to zero, while the far left still believes that, the Marxist idea is that capitalism is the root of all problems. I think they're both wrong. But it is clear to me that we're drifting towards a concentration of financial and political power that's dangerous for democracy, and it doesn't lead to greater prosperity. The kind of poverty portrayed in those movies, Hillbilly Elegy and Nomadland and Minari, it doesn't have to exist. It's not a matter of taking from the rich and giving to the poor. It's about not letting the rich exploit the poor. Corporate tax cuts didn't lead to job creation and greater investment in factories. It led to stock buybacks. Inflating the value of things that already exist isn't really investment. We know what works and what doesn't work. Well, gee, why am I talking about this in church? I think it's a fair question. Money is only one of the elements of life. And, an accountant might be able to tell you how to maximize your profit, but that doesn't maximize your morality or your emotional well-being. It's good that religious people try to feed the hungry and shelter the homeless, But our ultimate priority should be to change the systems that perpetuate the need for such charity. The answers are out there. The research is available. So are the resources. We just have through the old fears and prejudices that keep us from eliminating poverty once and for all. May it be so. Let's see. It is almost the end of our hour. I want to respect your time. I was going to, if I had a little more time, I would break us into breakout rooms randomly so you could talk with each other about this, but it doesn't look like I have time. But we'll have breakout rooms in the parish hall, quote unquote, afterwards. And I'll hang out in the parish hall if you want to tell me all the things I got wrong. I'm sure I got something wrong. But let's end our service this beautiful May Sunday with a wonderful hymn from Singing the Living Tradition, number 146, I'd like to share with you. Good, there we go.
ילדים בחופשה ישחקו תופסת בין לבין השדות. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה. עוד תראה כמה טוב יהיה בשנה הבאה.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunder clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and their vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with new hope and not in sorrow, and the promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
Tan, I would have one announcement that I did remember.
Okay. Go ahead.
Last week we made, my daughter Robbie Ann made the opportunity for anybody in the church to attend the online American Climate Leadership Summit. And I'm sure a lot of people didn't have time to do that, but I did it for 3 days. And I have to say it was very uplifting because there's so many partners with her organization that are doing, each doing their own little thing. And it really gave me a lot of optimism and a lot of ideas for the future. So I will let people know that these are on YouTube, the 3 days worth of panels and speeches. Sheldon Whitehouse, Gina McCarthy, some really good people. You can go on YouTube. It's the American Climate Leadership Summit, ACLS, and it's sponsored by Eco America with a small E. And I would just recommend, catching a couple of those, just if you want some, if you want to feel a little better about climate change, because we all know it's coming.
And climate change is a basic component of our economic future. Another reason we have to
Can
be
you
careful.
put that in the chat, please?
Sure.
Contact.
Sure.
Remember these? From the hymn book, I'd like to share. This is this was by Mark Bellatini. It's reading number 686, the benediction. And let me spotlight something. Go in peace. Live simply, gently, at home in yourselves. Act justly. Remember the depth of your own compassion. Forget not your power in the days of your powerlessness.
Right.
Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and stint not your hand of charity. Practice forbearance. Speak the truth. Take care of yourselves as bodies, for you are a good gift. Crave peace for all people in the world, beginning with yourselves. And go as you go with the dream of that peace alive in your heart. And I'll echo Reverend Steve by saying, our service has ended. Now our service truly begins. Okay.
Thank you, Jan.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I will set up, talk amongst yourselves. I'll set up the breakout rooms.
Okie dokie.
I want to say hi to Kim. Kim, I didn't say hi to you.
Can I make an announcement?
Sure.
Yeah. This is a little bit in advance, but Tuesday, May 11th, the Social Justice Committee meets at Kate's house on Valley View Drive in Greenfield at 1 p.m. So I just wanted to make that announcement. Thank you.
Dan, thank you. Thank you, one and all. Sorry, I forgot to take my mute off earlier.
There's Gene.
Okay.
Hey, Dan, did you say that those of us who want to talk with you about the sermon can stay in the main room?
Yes. And I've opened up 4 rooms, one for each of the 3 churches and one as an experiment just for kids. I don't see any kids left, but usually during social hour at Northfield, the kids are all playing over by the steps and eating donuts and stuff. Gosh, I miss that. I really do. So I must say that
I hope everybody will join Mark and I, because we love to catch up on the news in Bernardston. So
okay,
join
great.
the breakout room. And
I will flit among the rooms
I
for a minute
just
or
wanna-
so each room.
want to thank you for your courage to follow your own lead around something that is so unchurchy. But I really appreciated you bringing that forward. You know, the whole theme of the Nordic countries is we will have no need for services for the poor because we will not have any poor. And that's been their theme since the end of World War II, that all people will thrive. And it's like, when is our country going to wake up to the idea that when everyone thrives, you don't have a class war going on?
Yeah.
Right.
Oops.
Dan, isn't Biden's new proposals going to cover a lot of what you have covered today? Want to solve a lot of the problems with children, with climate change, with the economy?
Exactly, but those changes are temporary, and unless we advocate for them, for example, the $300 tax credit that's actually a direct payment is only going to last for a year. But Joseph Stiglitz, said like 7 years ago, I don't think things are going to go in the proper direction until there's another crisis, and this has been the crisis.
Right.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, but it's very hard to take away something good. You know, that $300 may go beyond a year.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Can I go to Northfield?
Yes, I want to go to Northfield too.
Okay, let me do that. Let me look down my list here. Where are you? That's Karen Schaefer, right?
Correct.
And Betty Gibson.
Okay, here you go. Betty, thank you for coming.
Not a problem.
Does anybody else need to be assigned to a breakout room and they can't do it on their own?
I think All Souls is all staying here with you.
Either that or
Looks like
What-
Link
it's
and
interesting-
Russ are in the Greenfield breakout.
Russ, you want to go there? Hold on, I'll send you there.
How do you go to a breakout room by your own? I don't understand.
Russ and Link are already there.
We're all here.
A breakout, usually, it depends on the device you're on. On a computer, there's a little icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen that says breakout rooms. And you can click on that and join one. On some pads, it's actually in the upper left-hand corner. Ulysses, I think you know more about this than I do. Yeah, about how to get to a breakout room on a different kind of device.
I don't even own a computer.
But that's the point, though. You're on a phone, right?
I mean, I know that if I click my screen, so you get more information, like the chat pops up. I see a little thing come up in my top left screen that says "Join Breakout Room." Yeah. I'm on a smart, like an iPhone. I don't know if that is helpful for anyone.
That's what I wanted to know. Yeah, that's what I was probing for. Rocky, you want to go to All Souls, right? How come I'm not seeing you?
Because you already sent him there.
I sent him there, but he hasn't joined. Okay.
Okay. And for those who are seeing the join, after the word Bernardston, First Parish or All Souls, there's a number to the right in blue. If you hover over that, it will give you a chance to join, but you have to hover over that number. Okay. And that number is always changing as more people join that group. But that's where the join is in the breakout room icon.
I don't see it.
You have to click on breakout.
Marilyn, would you like me to send you anywhere?
Yeah, yeah, send to Bernardston today.
Okay, stand by.
Send Tony to Bernardston also.
Okay, Tony. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Now that should be it. By the way, Sandra was talking about how Scandinavian countries have, really done a much better job of dealing with this. I want to show you. I couldn't include this in the sermon, but let me share it real quick. Nerd that I am.
We love your nerds.
This is a map of the world, and color coded to show how much the top 1% get. And if you look here around, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, I guess that's Czechoslovakia, France, Italy, they're all, the 1% get about less than 11.6% of national income. As things get redder, that means that the income is going between 20 and 44%. Look at the areas that are red. Are those the prosperous areas? Russia, Brazil, basically South and Central America, Southern Africa, India. That it's an
That's
interesting
where the
thing.
billionaires hang out, right?
It's where the billionaires hang out because things favor them that way. But the idea that there's a meme out there that, we need to have concentrated capital, individual capital, so you can build big things. And to a certain extent, that is true historically. I mean, if you, to build something big, you need huge resources. And my example, I was going to talk about Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, the two richest people in the United States. They're building rockets, SpaceX and Blue Horizon. And there's a school of thought that says, see, it's like the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. If you have your John Galt, who's super competent, he'll make things happen that the average prole can't make happen. What's false about that is that we now have mechanisms for concentrating capital without it being in one individual's hands. They're called mutual funds. So it doesn't have to be in one person's hands. Anyway, let me stop sharing that sort of.
Well,
You should see the slides I threw out.
That was very, very interesting.
We'd like to.
There is another model, which is really interesting. And it's the world's biggest co-ops in northern Spain. It's Basque. And what they used to concentrate capital was a worker-owned banks. That's how they got started anyway. So that people working for these co-ops, it's one person, one vote. And people working for these co-ops stash their cash in the bank. And that's how they concentrate capital. And they have extremely interesting systems for, and well, I don't know, I've been there twice, once for a 6-day training session. And it's really worth reading about. It's called Mondragon, My Dragon in French. Yeah. So I like it better than mutual funds.
There's another Spanish company that starts with S that is a cooperative.
There's probably a lot of them. Once Mondragon was so successful, there's an awful lot of co-op businesses around Spain, around northern Spain. And after Franco died, after Franco was out of the picture, they could thrive. But Franco was a big depressant. And the Basques fought against Franco nonstop since World War II. Yep. It's a really interesting place. Great equality and, very comfortable lifestyles. One of the first things they did is built a university, and it taught management practices for co-ops. And it also had sort of like our Franklin County CDC, it had a business incubator program for students. So they start new businesses all the time. Very cool. I think we need tons of them myself. I think they need to be everywhere.
Yeah, we're sort of stuck in an archaic view. I mean, I get the sense from some conservatives that we're all struggling to feed the world, and if any person is a freeloader, there won't be enough food for everyone. It's like we just got off the Mayflower, and if you don't work, you don't eat. The rules of you don't have to punish people to get them to work for there to be enough to eat or anything else. Undermining those memes, I think, is a key thing. This is an interesting graph.
Dan, does Pinky propose a solution?
Yeah, I'd encourage you, if you got Netflix, watch this. Capitalism in the 21st Century. I bet it's available in some other sources too. And there are a couple lectures. He certainly has a couple of lectures on YouTube that are worth watching. There's one particularly where he shares the stage with Joe Stiglitz and Paul Krugman. That three great minds on the stage talking with each other. This slide just shows, and this is something that Piketty really questions. He says, how did the United States get so much worse in terms of income inequality than Europe? I always hear that the United States is the wealthiest country in the world, and I say, according to who? When a lot of people, the poorest people in our society, I think, still have an image of Germany as a pile of smoking ruins from 1945. When you go to Europe, boy, you don't see nobody comes up to your car to beg for $1 at the output of the big Y.
My hunch is that World War II so leveled their society that they got to rebuild from the bottom. And they got to say that old way we don't want, because everybody was poor at the end of World War II in Europe, and so that theme of your last song, when we share, when we care, I think is where Europe got to start from in 1945. And the consciousness that they built on was a consciousness of the mutual devastation that we have never experienced. Our rich have never had it all blown out of them like the Europeans did. And it's a leveling that hasn't happened. And I don't know. I would like to think further together about how we build on the Biden vision of what's possible, because the Republicans are going to fight it, with every tooth and claw they can get.
Yes, here, Sandra. How do we take this?
We are in a class war. We are. And you can call it the Civil War, you can call it anything, but we're in a war, and we can't just look at graphs and talk about statistics. We have to go into the heart and say, what are we willing to do to make this change?
They proposed, which is jobs. They've got a proposal, which is job creation.
Well, Sandra, you asked what Piketty proposes as an answer, and he basically says an estate tax, progressive income tax, and in the case of the United States, he lays a lot of the burden of inequality on education not being available for two reasons. One is because elementary and high schools are based on property, the wealth of the community instead of a level playing field for everyone. It's been proven that if you start out, it's almost a straight line in one of his graphs of your level of poverty and how likely it is that you're going to go to college, graduate from college.
Well, college is not going to be the be all and end all for a few years anyway. We're going to use the trades. I mean, for instance, an electrician right now gets $100,000 a year, and it takes 4 years to train and get a license as an electrician. And we're going to train thousands of them because everything is going to electrify. Thousands of electricians. And I've been interviewing electricians, and they say, I was in college, but in 2008, the bottom dropped out because the debt got so high to pay for college, and they switched to the trades. So, I mean, I think climate change is going to offer us an equalizing opportunity, and it's going to happen through job creation and training.
Not only that, but the wages for college graduates have been just as flat as they are for everybody else.
A college grad only has a license to get to graduate school, and then, I've been reading about a PhD botanist whose lab struggles to get $165,000 a year and has to pay all the lab people that go there and buy all their equipment out of that. It's just, it's not a road to wealth.
Dan?
A job at a posting for librarian requiring.
It was a job posting for somebody that they required a bachelor's and X number of years experience. So someone spent all that money outlay to get their bachelor's and to, work under the system to get X number of experience. And they were starting at $15 an hour.
AKA minimum wage.
So who could repay their college loans if that's what their dream is, to do that at that rate? Like, it's crazy.
Consider electricians.
Carlin?
I wanted to bring up something that we've talked about before here after other sermons, is how does all this fit in with reparations? Do Stiglitz and Krugman and Piketty, do any of them fit that into the systemic prosperity model?
I would say that most economists believe that racial disparities are a special case of this inequality overall, and particularly Piketty says. I was going to have him say this quote. He basically says, in Europe and the United States, you have people, it's so hard to figure out how to tax multinational corporations and billionaires, and you can't see what they're doing anyway. So what happens is you blame the immigrants or you blame a racial group. Their concept is more along the lines of not, giving reparations as opposed to change the entire economy so that prejudice isn't the fallback position of people who are desperate.
I mean, so that
there are issues. The other thing about reparations. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So in other words, make policy so that somehow prejudice can't be used as a weapon. Is that what you mean? They think that that's possible, that we can somehow de-bias the system to make the the playing field more level. My concern about that is that after 400 years of slavery and the oppression that stems from that, how can we level the playing field when it's so unlevel by any amount?
Well,
I don't know.
There's one interesting aspect that I've heard as I did this research, and this might be a little controversial, is that in 1995, we changed the rules for immigration to allow many more people from Africa to emigrate to the United States, and a whole bunch of Nigerians moved here. Tracking their economic performance of the Nigerian immigrants over several decades, they found that their economic rise was roughly comparable to that of white people. So you can't. One of the ideas to think about with that is how much of the disadvantage of minority groups is a result of real personal bigotry, and how much is based on the trauma, the intergenerational trauma of what happened over the last 400 years. In other words, you could eliminate white people's prejudice, but that trauma is internalized, and also it leads to the idea that there's no use in trying of society. So there's a little bit of both. I mean, yeah, Roberta?
Or was that you?
I didn't say anything.
Oh,
I was hoping to speak.
Please.
It seems like, well, firstly, I mean, intergenerational trauma is huge and reflected in so many things. But I think that takes a little bit of the onus off of the economic factors that you were first speaking to around, like, say, banking practice and how that impacts housing and like generational wealth. And then also education and the interlocks with that and generational wealth and access. I feel like a lot of this education reform, and if we can change banking practice, like I was listening to something about the PPP loans yesterday, which were the small business loans, and how disproportionately they didn't positively benefit communities of color, because a lot of small business people who are people of color don't have relationships with banking institutions, partly for like so many complex reasons that I'm no expert and not going to try to speak to, but like, I mean, that just speaks to this like long history of like not giving loans and giving predatory loans and redlining. And there's so many deep like ways that we have kept up these divides and kept up inequality and kept people of color, especially Black people, from having intergenerational wealth through economic policy in order to keep up segregation after segregation. And it seems like all the things we're talking about are prime opportunities to make lasting change to that, so people can actually, like, their labor can actually result in, I'm running out of words because these things are so big, but yeah, anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you for speaking.
That makes me think of, I don't know how many people here read Mother Jones. The most recent issue is focused primarily on the disenfranchisement of Black farmers.
Mm.
And,
so much land has been lost.
And basically, there's a whole bunch. And I have, unlike Dan, my brain doesn't wrap well around all these details. I'll lose track of them. I do get the larger concepts. So I'll refer you to the magazine, which has a bunch of articles in it, which I think are available online as well. But something that wasn't even in my consciousness, how having lost like 90% of their land over many years, actually stolen from them, they don't have the basis that white farmers do, in a very similar way to what you were saying, Ulysses. And it's like, and if you talk about PPP loans, like you have to start from somewhere. So they don't even have the farms. They don't even have the land. Maybe they're leasing or tenant farmers. And so it's systemic in terms of that part of the history that is behind so much of this.
I still think reparations can be addressed right now in the climate change thing through job training programs.
Yes.
Yeah, that if you can, get trained for $100,000 a year job, you can afford a house. And many, many, many immigrant people have built enough wealth to pass on intergenerationally with education out of owning houses. And but I don't know if that will continue, depends on what they do with taxes for houses and things like that. But because
I would start reparations with the idea of the GI Bill that that blacks were excluded from largely, and focusing. I think looking at schools in disadvantaged communities and bringing them up to par with the schools in wealthy communities is the place to start. Politically, reparations are a minefield for the Democrats because they play into this meme that's prevalent that what is given to somebody is taken away from you.
Right. But I thought some of the most recent reparations proposals talked about finding ways that didn't involve taking away. I thought those were valid, but I can't cite them right now. Was it one of the men who came and talked to us a few weeks ago about it? Pam, you know this person. He's a major organizer, an African-American man who's a preacher in New Hampshire or Springfield, came and talked with us about reparations.
Willard Lett?
Yeah, but I don't know if it was he, but I know there are proposals for reparations that don't have to involve taking away from people, but involve restructuring the system and the way the government spends money and the way the government collects money that's yet uncollected, like the way taxes are collected, so that people who don't have money to give aren't forced to give it. But those of us who can pay more in taxes do. Anyway, I just wanted to keep it as part of the conversation about economics, because I don't think we can just shunt it off until some later time and let another 100 years go by. Because I do believe that the intergenerational trauma makes a difference.
Well, one thing is that in World War II, the United States built the biggest military industrial complex in the world, and half of every tax dollar, every discretionary half of every discretionary tax dollar goes to pay for that so far. Now we're building trillions of debt. We're accumulating trillions in debt. And there's a really good chance that we'll be able to shift it, because basically I think we're going to devalue the dollar. I don't figure out any other way that we're going to pay that back. So I think you want to invest in people's education and skill levels and infrastructure. That sounds like the best thing for me. And let the chips fall where they may.
Ultimately, I hope it's a both and not an either or. I wouldn't say, oh, let's do reparations and leave the economic situation the way it is. Jobs and education and the GI Bill. Yeah.
Well, Eddie Markey just proposed that that young people sign up for service jobs, get paid $15 an hour, but accumulate a $25,000 kitty for every year they work, that they can invest in whatever job training or things that they want to invest in. He just proposed that. I think it's a pretty good idea.
Beautiful. We'll see where it goes.
I can imagine all those young people. We need 1 billion trees planted just to make up for climate change, to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into trees. We need 5 billion of them, actually, globally.
We planted them before, we can plant them again, right?
Well, go ahead. Who?
I was thinking I'm still thinking about the reparations part of our conversation. And I was thinking that one thing we haven't brought up that seems huge is the rates of incarceration in communities of color, and the way that that's impacting both like family stability and youth access to stable educational opportunities, incomes in communities and in families. And also just like it keeps us economically centering this lower than minimum wage workforce. Like if you've ever bought a Victoria's Secrets bra or any number of other things that we touch and use every day, they're made by like basically unpaid prison labor. So it's just like the incarceral system is just an extension of, I mean, I'm getting on a soapbox now. I'm getting excited, you know, talking about money in church, but like, it seems like we can't really deal with any of these things for anyone without dealing with the rates of incarceration in the US. Thank you for letting me talk so much this morning.
Thank you for hearing your thoughts.
One of the things that I do is I've done my own taxes my whole life. And as for a good chunk of that time being a self-employed musician, learned a lot about the tax code and the dodges and the pitfalls and the problems. There were a couple of tweaks. There are ways that we could encourage wealth accumulation by people who don't have wealth. Part of the problem is right now, the average price of an average home is 2.5 times what it was in 1970. And part of that is, I said in the sermon, raising the prices of things that already exist is not investment. And part of the reason that housing prices have inflated, especially in places like Silicon Valley and Seattle and New York City, is that you have these very highly paid people at software companies and Microsoft and Google and Amazon bidding up the prices of what already exists to the point where people are living, you know, if you don't have a job in upper management, you're living in a tent somewhere. There is stock market is about double its historic value. And the rich are basically bidding against each other for oceanfront property and bidding against each other for shares of stocks. 80% of all stocks are owned by, I've certainly the upper 10%, might be even narrower than that. What else are they going to? I mean, that was the Republican fantasy. If we lower taxes, they'll build factories. Well, you're not going to build factory if you don't have customers. There is no shortage of capital in the world. In fact, the internet boom, all those bubbles were caused by big piles of money looking for ways to make more money. And that drives up the price. When, you know, if Bill Gates moved to Shelburne, would I be better off? You know, but the average would say, boy, the average income of Shelburne just rose 100 times. And that's those side effects of things. Gosh, I don't know how you tweak that.
Dan, when you first started speaking here, you mentioned doing your own taxes. It sounded like you were heading towards making a suggestion of something we all might be able to do or learn from, because I think all of us on this call are looking for something that we can do in our lives that helps contribute to these changes. Do you have any suggestions along that line? It sounded like you were about to go there when you mentioned your own taxes. Maybe I was wrong.
Well, I do. Here are the slides I omitted without being on slides. Capital gains tax should be the same as income tax, except capital gains should be indexed for inflation. That's a policy proposal. index capital gains from inflation. Top marginal tax rates should be raised to perhaps 50%, but we should go back to allow income averaging. So if a poor person has a really good year, they're not suddenly jumped into that bracket. TurboTax should be a federal and state entitlement. You shouldn't have to pay a private company to prepare your taxes. So, that software should be a federal thing. In most other countries, filing your taxes isn't this 2-week-long ordeal. And oddly, the property tax, the New York Times made a pretty good and surprising move for them, saying that maybe the state income tax deduction on federal taxes should be ended entirely, which is surprising for a New York paper. I don't want to get into the weeds too much there, but things like that. The tax code should encourage people who don't have capital to get it. Not only financial capital, but personal capital in the sense of education. I mean,
and savings. Don't forget savings.
Here's another proposal. If a person whose income is lower than the median has a savings account or has an investment account, they have a $500 mutual fund. If they roll over their earnings into that fund, it should not be taxed.
Well, it isn't if you put it in an IRA or a Roth IRA. Well, if you put it in an IRA.
Right, and I'm basically proposing that an IRA should be allowed without postponing, that you can use it earlier in your life before you're retired.
Well, one way to do that is if if your income is very, very low, you move it into a Roth IRA because the cost of moving an IRA into a Roth IRA disappears if your income is really low. So you just move a lot of money into a Roth IRA when your income is very low. And if you have an IRA, where the heck would you invest it where that you could have a conscience about it? And we have a new thing called ESG, Environment, Social, and Good. And it's now taken over about half of the investment money. I'm so excited because it's going to drive investment. It's going to drive corporations into meeting the expectations of ESG. I can see it. It's like, ESG is everywhere. So now, can you imagine that? It's going to drive capital into environmental good, social good, and that includes who gets hired for the upper reaches of CEO positions and all kinds of social good stuff. So it's a very small group of people, percentage-wise, that are invested in. But personally, my income was really low for a long time. You don't work for the Unitarian-Universalist Association and get much of a salary, believe me. And I did that for a while. When it's really low, I just moved money out of an IRA, investing the max that they would allow me to if I had the cash in the IRA. And that comes directly off your taxes.
Those are all great things. Yeah, what you say about Roth and IRAs is
I had then had the capital.
valuable.
If I had the capital to invest in solar collectors. So I covered the whole roof of the house in solar collectors. And then you could take it off your taxes with a tax credit. You got a tax credit for that. 1/3 of the entire cost was a tax credit. So there's just a lot of things to know about doing taxes. I've always hired somebody because my brain doesn't fold around that very well. But you're in a business.
Another thing that has occurred to me as I looked at the really complicated rules about estate tax is, and there are ways this is almost this way now, but here's my thought. Remember when I put up the slide about if you have $5 million, you can live forever off the dough and it'll grow a little bit. I think an estate, if you're willing that it should be about that. If you are willing to diffuse your estate among many people, let's say diffuse children, friends of friends, that sort of stuff, there should be some amount that you can endow them with and not pay estate tax. It should be essentially an inheritance tax. That would diffuse this, distribute it, this wouldn't necessarily help people in the lower half. But the idea is to diffuse the wealth a little bit. And there's one other idea. That escapes me now. But
Dan, you have really good ideas. And Pam, you have really good ideas about what you can already do because you've done those things. So that's really cool. It would be a real service to pool these into some document or blog post or something, just with bullet points. Is that you saying good idea, Ulysses?
Yeah. I don't even know what a Roth IRA is. So I'm just like, should I be taking notes?
Pam's right. I have done that. It's a really good idea, and start now. And it will pay off in your lifetime sooner than your whole lifetime. But I unfortunately have to go, and I can't take enough notes to take all these down. But Dan, I love all the suggestions you're making that haven't been enacted yet, and they should really be written down and sent somewhere important. And we should all copy them and send them to the same important place and say we support these ideas, because these feel like real things that need to happen that could actually help.
There are smarter people than me that are drawing lists like this, although I have a peculiar ideas about some of them that need to be tested. Thank you.
Connect with those other people that you think are more geeked out on this than you are, and maybe we can pool our efforts and get some of these things moving. Because I know that
I'll send it to Senator Warren. She knows more about that.
She would totally be into it. Maybe she would even, do something with them.
Thanks, Carlin. I will say that one of the problems in the liberal, I don't know how to describe it. Ulysses, the capitalist skeptic liberal, of which I was one, and one of the problems of wealth creation is this meme that Wall Street is a rigged game. So what happens is people don't invest their money in a way that really grows. The demonization of Wall Street is actually, according to the real rules of Wall Street, it's a way of organizing collective investment. It's not supposed to be a way of concentrating wealth. Wall Street ought to be a way where average people can store their wealth in a way that can't be destroyed, can't be stolen, and that regularly grows. And too many people buy into the idea that the stock market is only for rich people, and it's never been easier for average people to buy shares in a socially responsible company or a socially responsible mutual fund, or just to buy the market as a whole and let that grow. That idea of Wall Street as a casino has hurt a lot of people who could have benefited from it. Although as long as the market is being bid higher by the wealthy 1% who don't have anything else to do with their money, like the idea of investing Social Security in the stock market. What a terrible idea.
Yes, that's a terrible.
Because again, you're just raising the price of something that's already there. I can see the logic of that it right now Social Security is invested in treasury bills, which basically just hold them. That was the other idea I had, Carlin. I believe the estate tax, a wealthy person starts getting Social Security checks whether they need them or not. And I would say that a part of the estate tax right off the top is that if you have an estate of, let's say, over $5 million, or actually this is probably an income bracket. If you basically had income as a senior that did not, you basically Social Security, that there should be a clawback provision in the estate tax that goes directly to the Social Security Trust Fund. So I'm, the chief banker of Chase, and I'm getting probably $3,000 a month for 20 years. I don't need that money. When I pass, that goes back into the Social Security Trust Fund as part of the estate tax.
And you shouldn't be collecting it in the first place, you're saying?
That wouldn't be a good idea. Although my mother was a bank teller, and she used to really complain. She was a child of the Depression, and she'd see these very wealthy people come in with their Social Security checks, and she'd go, "They don't need that. This isn't what Roosevelt, was planning. This was for poor people." But if the second you make an income test for that, you undermine the political backing for the entire Social Security system.
Right.
It was intent. Yeah.
I wanted to share that recently the guest on Preet Bharara's Stay Tuned with Preet was the financial columnist for the New York Times.
Paul Krugman?
No, his name is Sorkin.
Oh, Andrew Sorkin, yes.
Right. And Preet was asking him about a number of things and one of the things that he talked about, because he had recently died, was the Ponzi scheme guy. And he did some interviews with him, actually. And he said that the thing that most amazed him about all of these greedy billionaires is that they don't need the money, and they even know they don't need the money, but they can't bear the thought of that they just want to keep getting more and more.
Yes.
And in some ways, why I can't think of the guy's name with the Ponzi scheme.
Bernie Madoff.
Bernie Madoff. He would sometimes talk about it as he was a victim of it, because people just really wanted to put his money in this account. And he even said, it's not like I needed the money that he was running this Ponzi scheme. And but it was like he had no conscience about it whatsoever. But why they want to just sort of keep having more and more money is just beyond me. And
would people mind if I shared one more slide that's sort of pertinent to this?
No, go ahead.
This is from Piketty's presentation. I forget which one, but they were questioning him about, well, how can you get that much money? And one of the things he talked about with this runaway thing, it is there, right? Is everybody seeing this?
Yes.
In this period of time, world GDP, gross domestic product, grew by 3.3%. The world adult population grew by a little under 2%. The average world income per adult rose by 1.4%. Well, right there, you see that there's a discrepancy. Right. Half of the world income is not going to the average. Average wealth per adult. Now, here is the growth rate of the top 1/20th of highest wealth holders. They're getting 6.5% growth. The the 1/10 of 1% are getting 6.8%. In other words, the more money you have, the easier it is to grow your wealth.
Right.
You get a higher rate of return with big bunches of money.
Which, by the way, I read Piketty's first book.
All 577 pages? Oh my gosh, you're good. I'm only on page 212 or something.
But it was, it's quite something to read that first one. But the second one was just really hard to understand.
Capital and Ideology.
Yeah.
I've got that on my table, but I figured I'd better finish the first one. Yeah, but I've fallen into this YouTube trap. There is so much good stuff, like the stuff that Annette shared, these workshops. There is a whole groundswell of great information out there. The problem is it's not being digested and sent out. And I think that's one of our jobs.
Yeah.
Is to kind of digest this, because Fox News is really good at putting out their
Right.
way of thinking about it.
Right.
Really good. We need to be better. And the facts are on our side generally, not always.
Right. I think that I have a friend in DC whose husband is originally from the Netherlands. And when I first connected with them, he was working for the EU to develop a common currency. And he said that one of the things he discovered in doing that was working with people in Italy. And they said, well, we always keep 2 sets of books. So it was hard to figure out their currency and what how it would be related and stuff. And then, so that he was working on that. And then the next thing I knew, because of a friend of his who became the head of the World Bank, he became the comptroller for the World Bank. And so I used to ask him a lot of questions about what the World Bank did and how it was different from the International Monetary Fund. And then when I was reading Thomas Piketty's book, and I saw it while I was visiting them, and of course he had it on his shelf there, and I asked him what he thought, and he said, oh, it's brilliant, it's absolutely correct about that, to measure things by just the GDP and not by the distribution and how it affects people's lives is not a way to make decisions about the economy.
And the paradox is that extraordinary financial power leads to extraordinary political power. You can contribute millions of dollars to campaigns thanks to Supreme
That's
Court
right.
rulings, and you perpetuate the view that entrenches the laws that make you wealthy.
Uh-huh. That's right.
Well, it was a very conscious effort. That I mean, it was literally a political drive to get control of certain states to be able to pass that kind of decision making out of the Supreme Court. That was a very conscious piece of work. So, and it's been going on since the 1950s.
That's right.
Yeah, there's a book called Democracy in Chains, which is worth reading. And it's about the conscious development of policy like that and how it started. It's interesting. And but there are ways around it. So our practical experience is useful. So for Ulysses' sake, for me, just my experience, I started throwing in a little bit of savings every year from the age of 32. I just kept putting it in there, and I put it in the Pax World Mutual Fund. And then I just let it go. And it eventually had developed enough. Pax World is socially responsible investing. But now the ESG is affecting many, many sources. I'm really excited. And it may be driving the investment capital network into social good. So can you imagine that?
And it is worth mentioning in our context that when I talk about investment capital and endowments and that sort of thing, that All Souls Church in Greenfield would not exist if it wasn't able to take a portion of its income from investments every year.
Yeah.
We don't get enough in pledges. We get less than half of what we need to run the church in pledges. The rest comes from our ancestors and the endowment funds that they set up, saying you can't really touch the capital, you can take the increment.
Yeah.
And I think Bernardston is the same way, and I think First Parish has got something there too. And it's just a demonstration of how you can do good with reasonable use of your money, and set up institutions that are more impervious to attacks, financial attacks, than we would as individuals.
Oh, and I forgot to say that one reason why people are pouring their money into ESG is because somebody from Harvard did this study to show that when the economy starts collapsing during the pandemic, ESG stabilized everybody's investments. So people are pouring their money into ESG because they want to keep it. So that's why.
Well,
I also use, personally, I use Vanguard.
Mm-hmm.
Vanguard is a wonderful thing.
But
it is fantastic.
Pax World is it's the example I use is Kellogg's cornflakes. Okay, it sounds like a good investment, like it would be a good thing that would be good for your soul, an investment. If you start looking at what most mutual funds invest in, it looks sort of like Kellogg's cornflakes, especially the socially responsible ones, but actually it's not proactively investing in let's say, transitioning out into climate change, into carbon-free climate change investment type things. Whereas ESG ESG investments are going proactively into environment stuff. And,
well, that's another misconception, though, about the stock market that I think liberals run afoul of, is that people somehow think that if you buy shares of a company on the market, that you're helping that company.
Yeah.
No, the company already sold that stock to the market in an initial public offering or something else like that. You are buying it from somebody else. You're helping some other poor sucker who bought that stock from the company. There's an indirect effect because you're possibly raising the price, and now that companies can buy back their shares, which used to be not allowed. It was regarded as manipulation. Yeah, you might be raising it, but the direct effects, mutual funds that actually make initial public offerings to companies that are making new kinds of solar panels, or like Moderna. Moderna is a speculative company. Moderna had never turned a profit. Many of the companies that have high stock valuations have never made profit because they got an initial public offering, and the people are hanging on and bidding it up, believing that those companies will have a breakthrough in the future that will pay off. I sort of went off there for a little bit. One of the things that bothers me about the entire economic structure, and it's hard to, I don't know how you would implement this, but in my time in business, what I found is an awful lot of manufacturing, a lot of economic activity is churn.
Yeah.
And forget about financial churn. I'm talking about, where's my iPhone? I have an iPhone 4S. It works great. It's what, 9 years old now? And it's at the point where Apple and Verizon is not going to support 3G and things like this. So I got to get a new iPhone. But it's a piece of silicon, basically. As long as you don't drop it, it's going to last almost forever. So are most of the solar panels. A lot of this projection that solar panels are all going to be junk in 20 years I don't believe that's really true. They'll get less and less effective. And what I want to have is what I call the vested society. In a vested society, instead of trying to make money by making things that break, making things that decay, you make things that last as long as possible and don't really depreciate.
Right.
Like a solar, if you invest in an oil well, that oil well is eventually going to run dry. But an electric car, electric motors last so much longer than internal combustion motors. We are in a thing where eventually, you'll have an electric car that can last for 40 years with maintenance.
Whoa.
Right.
Electric motors can run on magnetic bearings where the bearings aren't actually touching each other. They're all, I'm talking about slate roofs versus shingle roofs. That kind of companies have a disincentive to make things that last. Planned obsolescence is how they make things happen.
That's right.
The environmental costs of that are huge. So how you get products are repairable instead of you throw them away and get a new one because it's so cheap to do so, thereby putting the cost on your landfill of your business. That to me, and I haven't heard anybody really talk about this. And I don't know how to do it any better. I'm working on it.
So one strategy, I just sat in on a Zoom meeting with a company that was talking about climate change issues, basically. And one strategy, companies responsible for the recycling of their stuff. In other words, if you buy a rug, built into the price of the rug is the company taking it back and recycling the material. And if that were a policy it would mean that it would not be in the interest of the company to make something that had to be recycled constantly because it would cost them money. So that's a policy that some companies are now practicing, interestingly enough.
When I was living in California working for a company, California had a law that if you made a product, a manufactured product, you had to support that product for at least 7 years.
Oh.
You had to have spare parts to fix it. And if not, you had to replace it with the current model. And I was shocked when my old Ford pickup truck had a problem with its catalytic converter. Ford doesn't sell catalytic converters for that model year anymore. They turned me over to somebody else. And that difference has changed. Sears, companies like Sears would have spare parts going back to the 1930s for anything that they built. And now with cheap manufacturing in China, it makes no sense to stock parts as long as the waste stream for the minorly broken piece of equipment, isn't a factor, you don't have to pay for it. Yeah, you might as well.
Right.
Anyway, folks, it is 12:41.
Yeah.
So we
Anyway,
spent 2 hours online
it was
together.
a great talk. It was a great talk, and I always appreciate hearing what topic you picked to talk about.
Next month, I'm going to be more spiritual, I promise. It's going to be
Oh,
about...
I'm not going to watch them. Oh, but I did get the book from the library, Saving Paradise.
Saving Paradise.
Oh, isn't that great?
Yeah. I'm slowly reading my way through it.
What is it about? I don't know that one. Saving Paradise.
How Christianity traded the love of the world for crucifixion and empire.
It was written by Rita Nakashima Brock and
they're both sort of Unitarian ministers and trainers, etc.
Right. It was written by the woman who used to be the head of our seminary in Berkeley, California.
Oh, okay.
Who I once drove to the airport, and it's terrible. I'm spacing on it.
Okay.
It's basically the case that she makes. What you're reading it now. Can you say what the case is?
Well, it's largely looking at the early Christian writing and sort of interpreting it differently, saying that really, actually, rather than Jesus being sacrificed for our sins, was saying we can have earth, we can have peace on earth, and we can have a caring for one another, and that they looked on all of the early they basically were looking at all of the paintings and early things
Mosaics
in the churches. What?
Yeah, mosaics and things.
Mosaics and stuff. There were no crucifixions in them. There was no such thing as the cross. And they said it took their famous thing was, it took 1,000 years for Jesus to die. Of being crucified, etc. And it was all around building an empire.
And that empire, along with her other facet, is basically that it celebrated this world. Christianity in the earliest centuries was not about this world as a vale of tears,
right,
and beyond it with it'll make it all worthwhile. It was about celebrating the beauty of this world, that this world can be great, and it's celebrating that, which is in tune with earlier Jewish teaching.
That's right.
Jewish teaching didn't have heaven and hell and all that stuff before they were exposed to the Greeks.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, it was terrific, and I'm glad you talked about it. It's a very dense book, and I'm reading so many other things, but I keep working away at it.
Good for you. Thanks for your scholarship. Bye-bye, Karen. Pam, Ulysses, Nancy, Serafina, Roberta, thank you for joining us all this morning.
Thanks for everybody sharing all your knowledge. I'm so impressed by everybody in this group.
Well, we're glad you're here, Ulysses. We're glad you're here, Serafina. Keep it up.
Serafina, your cat is so cute.
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Nancy.
I'll see you later.